In this video, we're going to create a basic gun setup that will use ray casting to detect whenever the gun hits an object. It will create a moving bullet that will signify that the player has shot their gun. It'll spawn a sound file that'll sound like a gunshot, and we'll go ahead and create a muzzle flash. We'll also look and see how we can cue events on objects that are hit, such as decreasing an enemy's health, or making it die or explode, and destroying the enemy game object that we want to destroy. So the first thing we're going to want to do is set up a nice target for us to hit. You can see I have a capsule in my scene called enemy. Let's do a few things here. Let's create a new tag for our enemy, and let's go to add tag, and let's call it enemy. Great. The next thing we're going to want to do is create a new script. Let's create a C# script, and let's call this enemy stats. Let's drag and drop our enemy stats onto our enemy, double click it and bring up MonoDevelop, and let's go ahead and just create, for right now, a public bool variable called isHit. This will allow us to toggle isHit to true or false. So when it spawned, it is not yet hit. So let's go ahead and set that to false. Alright, great. So now we have a nice enemy in our scene. And let's go ahead, let me delete these previous prefabs. Let's go ahead and drop enemy down into our scene and create a nice enemy prefab in case we ever want to bring up another enemy. And let's create a few different targets within our scene. Control D will duplicate that enemy for us. The next thing we're going to want to do is set up our shotgun that I have in our assets. It's just a simple shotgun that I've applied my textures and material to. Let's see how we can get our shotgun attached to our first-person controller so it looks like a gun that is following our player's look, the direction it's looking. So let's bring in my first-person controller, and let's reset its values to 0, 0, 0, and let me bring up isometric so we can position it just right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on my game tab and dock it to the left side, and I'm going to select my shotgun, and I just want to bring it up and position my shotgun to where I want to see it on my screen. And let's change free aspect to 16.9 so we can get a correct aspect ratio so we can see just how much space we have on our screen. And I'm going to put it on the right hand of my character there. Alright, great. The next thing we're going to want to do is dock my shotgun onto the main camera of my player. So I'm going to parent my shotgun underneath main camera, and whenever I press play, you can see my gun now follows my character. And if you look in my scene editor, you can see how my gun follows the direction of my camera. Alright, if you want to see how we can get that crosshair on the center of our screen, then here, click this link and it'll go over all the steps on how to set up a nice crosshair on your screen. But we're going to move right along, and I'm going to hit Control P to stop playing that game. And I'm going to redock my game panel right here next to my scene panel. The next thing we have to do is we need to create a new empty game object, and we're going to call this bullet spawn. This is where our bullet is going to come out of our gun. So typically bullets come out of the barrel of our gun, right on the nozzle there. So I'm going to position this empty game object loosely where I want my bullets to start spawning from. And we're going to drag and drop bullet spawn right onto my shotgun. And now my bullet spawn will follow wherever my shotgun does. Alright, great. The next thing we're going to want to do is create a bullet model. And typically you would have your own custom bullet model in your modeling package of choice. But for the purposes of this video, let's just create a sphere. And let's just put it right at the tip of my bullet, or my gun rather. Let's position it so it's a believable size. And that looks like it could be a bullet coming out of this gun. And I'm going to tidy up my inspector there, and that looks good. Alright, let's rename my sphere to bullet. And let's create a script that will control the motion of my bullet. So I'm going to go to bullet, make sure it's selected, and in my scripts folder I'm going to create a new C# script. I'm going to call this move bullet. Alright, great. So I'm going to double click on this script, bring it up in MonoDevelop, and let's create some simple lines of script that will move our bullet for us. We need to accomplish two things within the script. We need to add motion to my bullet, and we need to destroy the bullet after a certain amount of time so our hierarchy here doesn't become clogged with clones of the same bullet. So we're going to do that by creating two public floats. Call this speed and set it to 1f. Let's create another public float and call this bullet lifetime and set it to 5f. And we're going to create a private variable, a private float. We're going to call this counter. The counter is going to help us to dictate how many frames have passed since the bullet was created. And let's go ahead and delete our start function. We don't really need it. And let's change update to fixed update. This help keeps the frames and delta time that we're going to use in a second all square with the game engine. So the first line of code we're going to do is we're going to use our transform.translate, and we're going to put in three different values. We want it to move 0 units per frame in the x-axis. In the y-axis we don't want it to move any distances per frame. But in our z-axis we want it to move at the speed we specified in our public variable right here. This will get our bullet moving for us. Next, let's use our counter to dictate how many frames or seconds had passed since the bullet was fired so we can destroy it. So let's create a counter equals counter plus time.delta time. So every frame that passes, counter will be update with the time that has passed since the bullet was fired. Let's create a nice if statement. If our counter time is greater than our bullet's lifetime, then we're going to destroy that game object. Alright, let's fix the formatting real quick. And we're going to save that. Now our bullet should move and destroy itself after a few seconds. So to get that bullet going, let's create our move bullet script, or select our move bullet script and drag and drop it on my bullet here. Let's go ahead and remove the sphere collider from my bullet, and here we have my move bullet script, and I have two variables I can change. Let's set that speed to 0.5, and 5 seconds will be good. And let's look and see what happens to our bullet. You can see it shooting off into the distance. I'll slow it down a little bit so we can see our bullet moving. I'll slow it down even more so we can really get a good bead on it. So I see my bullet moving and then destroyed after 5 seconds. Let's look at that again. So our bullet's moving to our target, and after 5 seconds it's destroyed. Alright, great, our bullet's going pretty good. I want to set up the speed of my bullet to be a little bit faster to mimic a actual fired bullet a little bit better. And now we're going to control when our bullets spawn on our mouse click. So let's go to my prefabs folder and let's drop my bullet that I just created from the hierarchy down into my prefabs folder here. Alright, and I'm just going to delete that bullet. Don't worry, it'll be able to come back in a second. It's going to come back because we're going to instantiate that bullet on a script that we put on our bullet spawn game object. Alright, so let's create another C# script, and let's call this shoot. And we're just going to drag and drop our shoot onto our bullet spawn, and now we have an empty script called shoot. And let's bring up MonoDevelop again, and let's select my shoot class right there. Let's format my brackets like I like it. And we're going to do a few things here. Let's just get our bullet being instantiated on mouse clicks. So to do that, I'm going to create a public game object, and we're going to call this bullet. Alright, I'm going to hit Control S to save, or you can save in the menu here. And if I look at my bullet spawn game object now, I have an empty variable here that I need to fill with something. Well, let's go to my prefabs folder and let's drag and drop bullet onto that empty little tab there, or box. Now whenever I call bullet in my code, Unity is going to know that I meant to call the prefab of my bullet here. Great. So let's get rid of my start function again. We're just only going to be using fixed to update. So let's change update to fixed update. And let's instantiate my bullet. So follow along with me. We're going to instantiate. What are we going to instantiate? My bullet prefab. Comma. Where am I going to instantiate it at? Well, I want it to come out of the position of my bullet spawn, right? So we're just going to simply call the transform of my bullet spawn and get its position. You'll notice that Unity formatted transform to be capital T. You want it to be lowercase t there. And where is it going to be rotated at? What direction is it going to be facing? Well, we're just going to do the rotation of my bullet spawn as well. Remember, lowercase t's there. We're going to hit save. And now, whenever I fire my bullet, fire my gun with left mouse click, actually, I need to have an if statement, because right now it's just going to spawn multiple bullets. Let's see what that looks like. We got a bullet hose now, don't we? So that's not obviously the behavior we want. We want to only shoot our gun whenever we left mouse click. So we're going to do that with a if statement. Alright. So if input dot get key code dot mouse 0. Mouse 0 signifies a left mouse click on our mouse. Let's put our brackets in. Let's indent that instantiate. And let's close off our bracket. Fix this formatting issue. And there we go. Let's try that again and see how our bullet will fire now. So it'll only fire if I hold down my left mouse click. But that's firing way too fast. We need to be able to control the fire rate of our gun here. So I'm going to hit Control P, and let's see how we can control that fire rate. Alright. So let's create another public variable, and let's make it a float. And let's call it delay time. Alright, that's going to control how many bullets fire per second when we hold down our mouse button. Alright. So what we're going to do is going to be kind of like our move bullet, in which we use a counter to measure how many frames per second have passed. So let's create another private variable like we did earlier, but this time in the shoot class. Let's use a float, call it counter, and set it to 0f. Alright, great. So now, whenever I fire my gun, I'm going to update counter to equal counter plus time dot delta time. And what we're going to do is we're going to have two conditions now when we fire our gun. The first condition is going to be my left mouse click. We're going to use a double ampersand. And the next condition is counter. If counter is greater than our delay time, then the gun will will only fire then. There we go. Great. So after I instantiate my bullet, we gotta do one more thing. We gotta set counter equal to 0, because every time we go through our loop, we want counter to be 0 again, so it can count fresh. There we go. And let's see what happens now. I'm gonna hit save right here. and you'll see on my bullet time I have a delay time of 0. If I keep it at 0, then nothing fires. But let's set it at 1 and see what happens. So our bullet wasn't firing because we have to set our counter outside of our if statement. So let's go ahead and delete it outside of our if statement and put it right there. And let's see what happens now. Now we get a nice slow fire rate. You can see in my hierarchy there, I'm creating bullets and destroying bullets. What if we want a faster shooting bullet? Well, let's put the delay time to 0.1. And now I get a machine gun. And it's following the direction I'm facing and hitting that crosshair nicely in the center there. Alright, so we got my bullet firing. Now we need to detect whether or not I'm hitting objects. And we're going to do that by using raycasting. Alright, so what is raycasting? Well, this video right here on the Unity website will show you a nice little tutorial on how raycasting works. So if you want to learn more about raycasting, you can watch it. But I'm going to go ahead and apply our raycasting to our current code here. So there's going to be a few things I'm going to want to do inside of my if statement here. So let's create a few lines. So I want to create a new raycast hit. And this will be called hit. This variable right here will be what we use to signify the object that is hit. And I'm going to create a new ray. Let's just call it ray. And it's going to be equal to a new ray dot transform dot position transform dot forward motion. A ray is going to be cast straight from our camera in a forward motion, so it will detect any object that the ray passes through. Okay. Now what we want to do is we want to detect whether or not our ray hits something. So let's create an if statement within our mouse button if statement. If physics dot raycast parentheses ray that we created up here out, which will signify what we hit, hit, which will be our local designation for the object we hit, and let's add a quick little bullet distance variable right here that will signify how far we want our ray to travel. But first, let's create a public float up here called bullet distance, and let's set it to 100F, 100 units the ray will travel. Alright, so if our ray that we created right here hits something, which we'll designate as hit, in the distance that we specify, which is 100 units, then what are we going to do? Well, for right now, we got to specify what we're going to hit. So we want to hit our enemies, right? So if hit dot collider dot tag equals enemy, a lot of if statements nested one another. Make sure your syntax is right. Debug.log. We're just going to do a simple hit screen, hit message to our console. Alright, let's hit Control S and save, and hopefully we get no errors. Alright, great. So let's make sure our enemies are tagged as enemy, and they're not. So let's select my enemies, tag them as an enemy. Let's bring up my console, which is right there, and let's test this thing out. Alright, you'll notice in my console at the bottom of the screen, when I shoot my gun at the walls and floor, I'm not getting any hits. But if I hover my mouse cursor over an enemy, We get hit, 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 nothing, 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 hit, 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 nothing, 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 and hit, 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 hit. Alright, great. So now we can hit enemies within our scene. We can get console messages outputted so we know we're hitting our guys. So let's add a little bit of flair to our setup right now. Let's see how we can add a particle effect for a muzzle flash and an audio effect to hear our gun whenever we fire it. Let's go ahead and make a audio effect real quickly. So on my bullet spawn, I'm going to add component, audio source, and I'm just going to plug in that gunshot asset that I have for this lesson. And I need one line of code to activate the gunshot. And let's add it right above our instantiate bullet line of code. And we're just going to call audio.play parentheses semicolon and save. Let's test that out now. Alright, we had a little error. What happened? When I pressed play, the gun sounded, but I didn't fire it at all. Well, let's go to my sounds, select my gunshot. Alright. That's not it. What do we do here? How do we get it not to fire when we shoot it? Let's select my bullet spawn. Let's go to my audio source. Play on awake. Let's make sure that's unchecked so we don't get a sound effect when we start our game. Alright, that's cool. We get a machine gun-like effect. And our audio is working now. Alright, let's set up a simple little particle system here to make sure our gun has a muzzle flare when we fire it. Alright. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Game Object, Create Other, and let's create a new particle system. As you can see, the default particle system in Unity that it creates is nothing like a muzzle flash. But let's just go ahead and call this muzzle flash. And let's change a few parameters over here in my inspector. The first thing I'm going to want to do is go to Shape, and let's change this to a box. Alright, and I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to scale this box down really small to the tip of my gun here. Let's make sure it's centered. There we go. And as you can see, now I just have a steady stream of white dots coming from my gun. Let's set a few different settings over here. First of all, we do not want our particle system to loop. We just want to have a burst of a muzzle flash and then call it a day. Second of all, let's make our duration really small because the muzzle flash is very quick. And our lifetime of our muzzle flash is quick as well. So let's set that at something like 0.05. Our start speed will be 0. We don't want our muzzle flash moving anywhere. We want it to stay in place. And we'll come back to size in a second depending on how big we want our muzzle flash to look. Alright. Let's make sure play on awake is on. Turn max particles to 1 because we only want one muzzle flash texture to spawn. And we'll go to emission. And let's up that rate to say 5,000 because we want a fast rate whenever our muzzle particle system's called. We already got the shape of our box, so that's good. Let's click on our renderer tab, and we got to set our texture for our default particle. So let's change gears for a second and go to my materials folder. Let's create a new material and call this muzzle flare flash .mat or underscore mat, and let's change its type to particles additive, and let's input my muzzle flash texture that we have. And now we have a material that has a transparent black background and just has like a muzzle flash explosion. Alright, so let's select my muzzle flash particle system again. Let's go back down to render, And let's select a new particle system for that. And you can see I have a few different particles already made, but I want to select my muzzle flash. If you have trouble finding whatever materials you've made, they're alphabetized, or you can drag and drop onto your material right here. So now whenever I press simulate, I get a quick muzzle flare. Great. So I think all of our settings are correct now. We're going to do a few things with code now. Alright. Let's go ahead and drag and drop our muzzle flash onto our shotgun. Alright. And within my bullet spawn code, I need to create a new public variable. And I'm going to put it underneath there, and we're going to create a particle system and call this muzzle flash. I'll hit save, and let's look at my bullet spawn object now. I have a muzzle flash, and we're going to drag and drop my muzzle flash particle system right on top of it. Great. And now all we have to do is play our particle system whenever we click our left mouse button. And I'm going to call my muzzle flash variable right here dot play, just like our audio. Hit Control S to save. It's play our game scene. And there you have it. Let's see. We have the same problem we did with our audio. Notice we had that quick little muzzle flash when I pressed play. Here, I'll show you again. Boom. So how do we fix that? We're simply going to unclick play on awake on our muzzle flash. So make sure that's not checked, and let's test it now. No initial muzzle flash. Great. And notice our bullets are disappearing. Our hierarchy is becoming cleaned up. We're getting enemies hit. Everything's great. Alright. So how do we get things to trigger on our enemies? Well, as you can see in our enemy script, we have a boolean is hit. What we need to do now is whenever we need to replace our debug.log hit to toggle that is hit script on our enemy. So let's do that real quickly. So we need to add 3 lines of code to access these enemies and change that is hit boolean to true or false, depending on how you want to do it. So we'll unclick is hit and set it back to false. And let's add some lines of code into our raycast part of our script. So under our debug.log hit, let's add some lines of code. First, we need to make a new game object variable, and let's call that enemy just hit, meaning the enemy we just hit with our bullet. And let's set that equal to hit, which is our object we just hit, specified up here. So let's set it to hit dot collider dot game object. And this is going to set our enemy just hit. It's going to assign the enemy capsule in our scene to enemy just hit, so we can now access its components. So to do that, we need to get a get component function going. So we're going to call this enemy stats. Hit enemy will be our local variable for this, and we're going to go enemy just hit dot game object dot get component, and we want to access those enemy stats. Enemy stats is what holds that is hit boolean or not. Let me fix that bracket right there. And hit enemy dot is hit will equal true. We're going to save the scene here, and let's create let's say a point light, and let's position it above our enemy right here. Let's make the color green. That's a little too green. And under our enemy stat, let's see, let's go to our enemy stats here. So under our enemy stats, let's create a public game object and call this hit light. Close it out. And let's go back to our enemy scripts. You'll notice, or our enemy models rather, and you'll notice we have a hit light. So I'm just going to drag and drop that. In fact, let's go to my enemy prefab and drag and drop it down there. Let's just do it to each one then, real quickly. Boom. Boom. So now that when any of my enemies get hit, we're going to check for if is hit equals true. I believe it's equals. Then hit light dot color, lowercase c on that color, equals color red. Alright, let's see if we can get this to work. Is hit is immediately set to false. Yeah, we simply just need to go and put is hit equals to true, and that'll turn our light red anytime we hit an enemy. So let's start it up again. Boom. And that's how we can use triggers on our enemies to trigger different events, such as a light changing or an explosion from the enemy or anything of that nature that you can come up with. Alright, so I hope you found this video useful. If there's any questions, just leave them in the comments or email me. And hope you get your guns working. Thanks.